All right, it's 7 o'clock and welcome to the Portland Urban Beekeepers meeting for September. My name is Cheryl Wright. I'm the president, and it is becoming autumn. And I know that it's still technically summer until September 21st, but the nights seem to be getting cooler and hopefully we'll be cooling down a little bit. So why join the Portland Urban Beekeepers? And basically, we have our free library, books, candle molds, DVDs. And the way we're accessing this remotely is you can contact Katie Fackler. She is the librarian at portlandurbanbeekeepers.org, and she can pull you a library book and you can go by and pick it up. And she's also handling our textbooks for the class, which is Dr. Karen's Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping. So also we have equipment rental, which means that you don't have to pay for it. Basically, we have 3 manual extractors that you just contact the vice president at portlandurbanbeekeepers.org and get yourself on the list. The motorized extractor, we're asking $10 for every person who uses it, with the caveat that maybe you will have it for 4 or 5 days. We have a refractometer and we have an observation hive, we have a frame jig, and I kind of took the bee vac out of circulation because it seems to be killing bees, which is not good. We also have a swarm list, which works really well. And we have our Bee Buddy connections. We have some Portland Urban Beekeeper specific classified ads on our website. And we have free beekeeping opportunities at our club apiary. So support our mission. And we're a 501c3, which means that we're a nonprofit organization. So all of the dues go back into the club, whether it's supporting the apiary or it's supporting our speaker program or it's supporting people who are doing research on bees, like the Sagili Bee Lab down at OSU. So that's where your money is going, and that's what we do with it. And thank you if you decide to join. So there's our motorized extractor. Again, it's first come, first serve, and you just email the president at portlandurbanbeekeepers.org and we'll set that up and you can come by and pick it up. We do like people to have a little bit of experience. It does require some assembly and disassembly, and cleaning requires some disassembly. And it is a large centrifuge, so it is, can be a dangerous piece of equipment. So if you're comfortable with all of those aspects, then please feel free to contact me. Okay, apiary work parties are open and going at Green Anchors the first and third Sundays from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that's up on North Bradford Street. And if you're familiar with the area, it's right near the Cathedral Bridge in St. John's, North Portland. So I'm going to let Bruce talk to you. He is our apiary manager, and he has a plan for what we're going to be doing this coming Sunday, which will be Labor Day. So Bruce, you're still muted. You'll just need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Okay. My name is Bruce Kessler. I am the apiary manager. And as Cheryl said, the apiary is over at Green Anchors. It's very close to the the St. John's Bridge and next to Cathedral Park. Just a little bit about the apiary. Some of the goals, there's 4 fundamental goals. One is hands-on experience. And I'd like to have it where we have coach pupil, where we have a knowledgeable person instructing somebody that doesn't know it, isn't familiar with the technique, and they'll do the work and be instructed by a knowledgeable person. So that's one of the goals. The second is just to appreciate nature, the beauty of the creation, all that. The third is to build friendships. And I've been involved with the apiary for a number of years, and I've met some really nice people. So it's a neat opportunity to make friendships and then to have fun. Cheryl did talk about our work parties are the first and third Sundays of the month from February through October, from 10 to 12. Just right now, we only have 2 Langstroths and 1 top bar hive. Ultimately, we'd like to have 4. A little bit about where we're at with the apiary progress. We were able to harvest 3.5 supers of honey. And I want to thank Ryan McVetta. because of COVID, we couldn't have work parties. And because he lives in the area and is very interested in apiculture, he took over the hives and did a really good job. So I appreciate that. So we got several gallons of honey and we've donated it to charity. A little bit about work parties, some of the basic fundamental rules because of the state mandates. When we're in close areas, when we're discussing what we're going to do, we'll have to wear a mask. And then working in the apiary, you must wear a veil. When we're working with the bees, just for liabilities and so forth, you must have a veil on. Although I see in the little picture there, somebody didn't get the word, but the word is that we should wear a veil. So what we are planning on for this work project, the 5th, is learning about feeding bees and discussing feeding bees and getting ready for the winter. We also have quarterly work projects where we help with apiary maintenance, and this is where the quarterly work project, we're working with Tim Wessel, the director of the Green Anchors, in trying to help out there, keeping the yard up. On the 19th of September, we'll be removing the mite treatment, which is Apivar, and evaluating the effectiveness of our treatment. We'll also discuss more in discussing preparing hives for winter. October, the meeting's the 3rd to the 17th. It'll kind of depend on weather and other variables. We want to finish up preparing the hives for winter, insulating and discussing it. We will also have a guest a presenter that will be talking about what to do for the winter projects we as beekeepers should be doing and preparing our equipment for spring. Also be discussing various treatments just for information. And then we'll take a plan. I'll take some time to plan for 2022 and goals for the apiary and what people would like to see accomplished. So that's where we're at with the apiary. Look forward to any of those that would like to come and work on the 5th.
All right, Bruce, thanks. Good rundown. So we do have our Bee Buddy program, and I know that we have a lot of new beekeepers who are attending the Zoom meetings, as well as we have this link up for anyone in the community who wants to see it as a recording or who may be on it live. And this is something that is only for members, but if you are a member, you go to our website and log in and click on the resource tab. And then there's the Bee Buddy map, and you can click on the hot link if you want to put your information in, and then you choose to be a mentor or a learner. And for all of you experienced beekeepers out there, we need as many mentors out there as we can get. We could use probably about 5 or 6 more mentors. But if you want to be a learner, or you can put yourself on as a learner and just find somebody in your neighborhood who's also a learner, and you can work together. So Ian Horvath put this together and built it for us, and this is what it looks like. So you can see that we have mentors scattered around the area as well as learners. And then you just click on the tab, and what comes up is their name, their contact information, and how many years of experience they've had, and things of that nature. And if you want to take yourself off, if you've been on, put yourself on and things came up, it's quite easy. You just take yourself off. So our speaker lineup for 2021 in October, we're going to have Anthony Malathopoulos, who's going to talk to us about pesticides. And pesticides are a different issue in the agricultural area than they are in our urban and neighborhood area. So he's going to speak specifically to what we as urban and suburban people need to think about with pesticides, maybe like how to identify if your bees have gotten into pesticides, what they might look like and what those risks are. And in November, we're going to have Bill Hesbach talk to us about thermal regulation, insulation, and ventilation, specifically going into winter. How much do we really need to do for our bees to keep them healthy and comfortable through the cold weather? So we have tentatively scheduled the honey tasting for December 1st, which is the first Wednesday in person. That will be at the Multnomah Friends building on the first floor, which is on Stark Street. This is where we had it 2 years ago. Who knows what the Delta variant of COVID will do? It may peak in September and October and be completely burned out by December, and we may be in a really good place where we could meet in a small groups and taste honey without a mask on. So that's sort of what we're hoping for, and so that's what we're planning on. So if it comes down to the unpredictability of this virus that we can't hold it, then what we're going to do is just take a break in December. We won't have any meeting. But we will be having our elections in November. So that's something I want everybody to think about. We do have several openings, which include the president and the vice president. I think we have the treasurer filled, but we also need a person to meet and greet with the community. So someone who would maybe answer emails and just interface a little bit with the community. Now, B-School was a raging success. We had a lot of people interested, and we have people who are still interested. So we have created After B-School 2021, where if you want to purchase the recordings, they're available, all 4 of them, for $45, and then the textbook, which is $40. And if this is a great time to start thinking about keeping bees, doing all of the reading and the research to find out if that is something that you might be interested in starting. Generally, the bee season starts in spring, so this is plenty of time for you to think about it, and these recordings are available on the website. Need a queen? Want to learn to raise your own? We have one of our local beekeepers, Steve Gomes. He's in the final stages of qualifying for his Master Beekeeper title in the Oregon Master Beekeeper program, and he has locally raised survivor stock queens for sale at reasonable prices. And he's also interested in having queen rearing workshops and maybe starting a local queen club. So if that's something that interests you, you can contact him at this email address or telephone number, and that might be a lot of fun. All right, so moving into fall. What are our bees doing? So we know that the adult population now is starting to decline, and our brood population is beginning to decline. So as the population contracts, how does this impact us as beekeepers? Well, it should make you think twice about going out and catching a swarm, because a swarm caught this late is probably not doing well. It's going to be small, and it's not going to really have the capacity to build up to overwinter. And plus, just an FYI, many of the swarms, if you've noticed, are at ground level, and that's probably because they're yellow jackets. So if you get a swarm call, be sure you get a photograph before you drive out to pick them up. And what are our mites doing? Well, the mites are raising, they're reproducing logarithmically at a very accelerated pace right now. And in complementary to the brood shrinking, you're getting a big infestation right now. And so the main problem with the mites, not only are they damaging your winter bees, but they're also transmitting viruses to your winter bees. And so these winter bees, remember, live longer than the summer bees. So the winter bees, they're geared to live about maybe 3 months, whereas your summer bees are probably living for about 6 weeks. So these bees need to be as healthy as possible so that they can live their full lifespan and raise the next spring and summer brood that will be coming for 2022. So that's why it's of paramount importance now to be thinking about your mite management plan. And so here they are, our little friends, the mites. So September, what should we be doing in our hive? The nectar dearth is here. So if you don't have a feeding plan, you should probably have one. 2-to-1 syrup at this time of year so that the bees can get it concentrated down into capped sugar syrup honey to get them through the winter time. If your colonies are new, continue to feed and monitor as you have been doing. And robbing screens need to be on. And again, manage your mites, manage your mites, manage your mites. Here's some, the Varroa Mite Management Decision Tool at the Honeybee Health Coalition. Can't recommend them enough. They give you all the different strategies and the doses and when and how to put them on. So this is just a little sample here from the Oregon State University, but you have these tools at your fingertips, so read them and become really familiar with them. This will make or break you, is your mite management and your feeding. So here's just some examples of some robbing screens. They can be do-it-yourself or they can be store-bought. And just to review, you want to have your brood pattern looking nice and solid like this, but of course this is probably a spring or summer brood pattern. So what you'll see when you pull up is you will see probably a more contracted brood pattern, but you want to see it fairly solid. The above left is a spotty brood pattern, which is not ideal. You may have a failing queen or a number of things. If you're seeing your eggs, you want to see one egg in the center of each cell. You want to see your larvae in a nice little pool of milky white fluid. And there's been, as you know, a drought in Oregon. So the bees are looking a little bit dry. So make sure they have a water source and make sure that they look like they're getting their water. American foul brood is a real problem in the fall. You can see that these cells do not look healthy. They have greasy little specks. They have perforated cappings. The larvae is kind of looking yellowish. And if you pull the frame and hold it at an angle, you will see this characteristic pathonomic scale for American foul brood. And that's a big problem. It's a bacteria, sporulating bacteria, which is extremely difficult to get rid of. And many times people will have to euthanize their hive for that. We do have an American foul brood task force. So if you pull your frames and you see this and you're not sure what's going on, contact us at the Portland Urban Beekeepers on our website. We have a form for you to fill out and we will come and do an inspection, and we have little point of care tests that we can assess it on the spot and tell you if this is your problem or not. Small hive beetle is another thing that we're worried about. And again, it's not on our radar because people in Oregon, beekeepers in Oregon, don't think it's a problem, but we've had many beekeepers who are reporting that they're seeing this more and more in their hives. So when you pull those frames, take a look and see if you see these little beetles. They're not as small as varroa mites. They're fairly easy to see. The problem is that if you're not expecting to see them, you might not see them. So do keep a lookout for those. There's gives you the size perspective, and they can really cause a mess in your hives. Yellow jackets, we all know that those are a problem now. Remember that if your yellow jackets are heavily predating your hives, that it's probably something going on in your hive. Be sure to do an inspection, make sure that you're not queenless, because this is often when the yellow jackets will really get in there. They are Hymenoptera. They do smell the similar pheromones that the honeybees do, so they can pretty much sense when a hive is in demise. Personal experience. Bald-faced hornets, these are another group of hornets that can go in and can quickly decimate your hive. So keep an eye out for them and what their nest looks like. Scope out your trees. Make sure you don't see anything that looks like this in your tree because it's a real problem and it will take your colony out. And then, of course, the murder hornets, which everybody is extremely interested in. We have not seen them in Oregon, which doesn't mean that we won't. So if you see anything that looks extremely large with a big orange head, do try to let the Oregon Agricultural Extension agent know immediately. They are not recommending that you kill it. They do want to try to find their nests. I mean, that seems to be where the money is. So keep your eye out. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we won't have to worry about this. But you can see in size how much larger they are than your yellow jacket or even a European hornet. So I don't think you would misunderstand what you were seeing if you saw one. And then we do have beneficial wasps. So please don't kill everything that's yellow and black with the stinger. These are beneficial pollinators. They're very gentle. They don't sting. This one on the far right is that's not a stinger on the back side of it. It's an ovipositor that lays its eggs from that. And when they land on you or near you, as it happened to me, it can be a completely freak out experience because they are fairly large, but don't kill them. They are not a problem for anybody. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about anything? Okay, well, then we'll move forward. I'd like to introduce Dr. Dewey Karen. He is going to talk to us today about defensive bees. Will Africanized bees become a Portland urban beekeeper concern? Dewey does a lot of things. He's a professor emeritus from Delaware, and he's also an affiliate faculty at Oregon State University. He's a mentor in the Oregon State beekeeping program. And he also runs the Pacific Northwest Honeybee Survey, where he collects the data and looks at our annual overwinter losses. He's also the author of the book that we use for our class, Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping. And the copies that we sell, we try to sell signed copies. And so, Dewey, welcome. And thank you for presenting tonight.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate it. Pleasure to join you again this evening. As indicated, I'm going to talk about something that we're all too frequently seeing this time of year particularly, and that is defensive bees. So I'm going to talk a little bit generally in terms of defensive bees, and then a little more specifically with Africanized honeybees. And be glad to answer some questions. At this point, we always wonder if our bees are thinking about us too, because we certainly are thinking about them, wondering how they're doing with mites, and wondering why that colony that was was really nice during the summer became a little bit harder for us to manage when we go into it, and a little bit harder to understand kind of at this point, they're in a transition, kind of what they're doing. Because things are sometimes a little bit jumbled up. And of course, we're really wondering, do they have enough to get through winter, depending on what our winter weather will be? Hopefully I didn't take too much. So at this time, we certainly are thinking about them. And as indicated by Cheryl, I started back a long time ago with Africanized bees when they actually came from South America into Central America, and have had a chance to visit and work in a number of the Central American countries. And as you know, go to Bolivia as well, where I don't have a choice. I have to keep Africanized honeybees. I don't have a choice of the type of bee that I keep. All righty, let's pull the curtain and we can get underway. Now, I want to say at this point that if you hear some things and me stumbling for words, if you would please excuse my senior moments that I hope won't come up too frequently. I had this occasion, two seniors in the home were playing cards. One says to the other, "I'm so embarrassed. I've known you for years, but right now I can't remember your name." To which the other one replies, "Oh, dear, when do you need to know this?" So we'll hope we won't have any of these senior moments. How about as a warm up here as well? Two drunks were sprawled in the gutter. One looks up and says to the other, "Hey, look, here comes man's best friend." And to which the other one replies, "Yeah, and he's coming with a dog too." And finally, for this time of year, what is small, black, and yellow and drops things? Of course, a bumblebee. All right. So what am I trying to do with the next few minutes? And thank you for offering me this opportunity to be able to join you again this season. Talk about defensive bees, trying to find what is going, what we have in terms of defensiveness and how we can look at it. Then some basic things on one of the types of bees that is very defensive, Africanized bees. And then come back to that central question that we're offering for this evening, and then need we be concerned? And then finally handling back in terms of how we might handle defensive bees, whatever their origin might be. So let's saddle up. I've got my Napoleonic blanket on the trusty steed. So let's saddle up and get on into looking at defensive bees. All right. I prefer the term defensive rather than aggressive, but many people use aggressive. The bees were aggressive. They came after me. The yellow jackets were aggressive. The biology is really defense. We may not know we insulted that bee, or we stepped on its nest, or we did something to get it to be in a mode of defense, but it certainly is a defensive strategy. In each of our bee colonies, whatever time of year, certainly now, that there are guards. There are guards at any and all of the various entrances. However, as we go into as beekeepers, we go into our colony, we are much more likely to be stung by the soldiers. So soldiers are in the hive. They're not those guards that are there at the entry. The guards that's their post, and they don't really tend to leave that post. What we often are being stung by are these bees that are in the hive that are not then actively doing something else, and we call them soldiers. Bee defense, when a bee stings us, is really a 4-stage response, but they go through them very quickly, and we may not be well aware that they are actually going through this type of a behavior response. First is alerting. So this may be any number of factors. You walk in front of their colony entrance, you open up a colony, you jar a colony, any number of different things may be alerting, and they may be related to things that are being done even before you get into the apiary. Then there's an activating phase, and that they are then responding. So with that jolt to the colony, inadvertent or not, then that's an alert. That's something that these soldier bees and other bees that are in the hive might then react to, and that react is an attraction. They're going to try to find where that disturbance is coming from. The person, individual walking in front of the colony, opening the colony in front of the colony, et cetera, whatever it might be. So alerting, activating, attracting. And then we're all too familiar with that last stage of stinging. But actually the bees that respond, that are attracted to an alert, are also capable of fleeing. So it's a stinging or fleeing behavior for the bees. And not taking away my thunder about Africanized honeybees, their reaction as a bee generally, in other words, that racial mix of bee generally is to sting, and sting right away. Generally, with our colonies of European bees, when we, for example, open up the colony, the bumping them, opening them up, then activate the bees, then fly towards us in their movement of smell. Then they will attempt to go at areas where there is a difference. So a white suit with a dark veil, or a person going into the apiary veilless. As you heard, we don't allow that in the pub apiary. Why? Because there's a difference in look. It just looks different for bees. That's why we might get stung at the ankles. We might get stung at the wrist. It just looks different for the bees with their eyes. That flying towards something can be because of movement. And when we open a hive, we just don't stand there. Usually we're moving, we're removing another piece of equipment or something. Smell, and they will react to smells that are very different from themselves. And these smells can be very subtly different, such as the smell of a yellow jacket versus a smell of a honeybee. Different appearance, different way that it is flying. Obviously, a person walking in front of the colony, just very different. So fly towards something. Now, European bees then attempt to intimidate initially. rather than stinging immediately, as Africanized bees tend to do. The intimidation is to drive the disturbance away. So it's a bouncing off. You may well be aware of this, for example, a little bit colder temperature. You often won't get the sting, but you'll get bees immediately bouncing off your equipment or your face, okay? And then they've got that decision for a bee, that is to flee or sting to attract help. The issue often after we've received the sting is that a sort of canceling out the flee behavior, because the enemy has already been identified. It's been marked with a sting by another worker bee, and they're going to then respond to that smell, that difference. There's an odor, an alarm odor associated with the sting. Now, bees that are highly defensive, hope not in your apiary, but if you have a colony that's now more defensive than others, Africanized bees, they don't do anything different than other bees do. They are just responding a little more quickly, and particularly then with some of the bees in the makeup of bees, in part related to racial differences, then more persistent. And that bouncing off, that pursuit, that response to existing sting pheromone, just then persisting in their continued attempts to drive the intruder out, drive the intruder away, respond to the sting that's stuck into the intruder. So defensive means that bees are defending something. And as I indicated, we may not be aware of what that is. That does require some alerting. And again, we may not be very aware of what that alerting may be. And it doesn't have to be our appearance in our bee suit that day in our apiary. It can be alerting that has been going on through environmental activities, alerting through types of changes in behavior, et cetera, all those things that will help or will consistently make bees defensive. Now, the biggest reason that bees are defensive when we've got a ability to make a selection with bees is because of us, because of the beekeeper. And that occurs with sizes of colonies. As a beginner, individual with not a lot of experience, that colony that was very easy to deal with now is a bigger colony. And we are reacting differently as we open and do our inspection. And so too are the bees in terms of the response. So in a number of instances that we can identify, it's because of what we, the beekeeper, are doing or have done, about to do, the way that we've approached the colony, the disturbance we've created, that really then leads to bees being defensive. Colonies that are bigger have more soldiers, and so they do then, larger colonies compared to smaller colonies have that ability then, or that tendency to be more defensive. And that's what we're talking about this time of year. Colonies that are bigger, and we're doing a lot more activity with our colonies after a period in the summer, which once supers were on, we were not. Now, some of the others can be, for example, changes in weather, changing conditions, such as conditions where there is not as much resources coming in our drought now, for example, weather, where the weather changes during the day, weather front moving in, we're into the colony under cooler, less ideal conditions for the bees. All these can be alerting conditions. Hungry bees are another one of those factors of the colony defensiveness. The bees responding to the stimulus of a sting. And when we dress in our suit of armor to go into them, we may not even be aware that a bee has stung our our equipment. Not us, it hasn't gotten through to the skin, so we're not feeling it, but we have stings in our equipment, in certain types of jackets. Certain types of equipment will hold stings better, and so they're actually responding to the sting, that we're just not aware of. Their pattern in terms of alerting will change with seasons, and change then with weather conditions, drought conditions, so that in the spring, when colonies were smaller, we could perhaps have been a little bit more rough with the bees, more vibrations occurring, and not gotten stung, where at this time of the year, we might, because they are now more defensive. A queenless condition, it varies. In some cases, a queenless condition that has gone on for a period of time, the bees just are not responding even to some normal things. But newly queenless conditions, rearing of queens in terms of preparation for swarming or absconding, those bees generally will or can be more defensive. None of these are a given, of course. These are just some of the qualities that may lead to that. Smells, movement, as I've talked about. We talk about our body smells, even some of the artificial smells that we use on our body, but also just mowing grass, for example, using a hand trimmer without hitting the colony. Just very different. And again, it's something that can be alerting, particularly with the trimmer and the mower. That's also creating vibration, and we're moving around with it. Inadvertently, we may not be right in front of the entrance, but the bees will have that ability to see sort of in all directions, depending where they are in their colony or outside of it. Disturbances. Disturbances including that of predators that have been visiting, whether we know it or not, and us as a beekeeper, because no matter how gentle we may be, we're opening up a dark, smelly home, and we're creating something different. It is a disturbance. Change of bees as we change over from one mixture of bees to another, but even changing a bee yard location, particularly when we're not moving it very far, we'll get often some bees that are more defensive. It's an alerting response to all of those things that are going on, and they may be ready to sting. And certainly in terms of some change in location where bees are. And finally, genetics. So we speak of some racial mixtures of bees as having a greater propensity for defense, and certainly Africanized honeybees fit in here. This photo that I have here is of a queen rearing program of one of the countries. This is Panama. And you can see all that's been done is taking the cover off. The colony's been smoked, and you can see that the response of the bees just kind of boiling out just everywhere that they can get out right away, just to this this disturbance. And as I point out, this is a queen rearing program to produce a gentle bee to distribute to the members in the country, beekeepers in the country. Unfortunately, where we locate these queen rearing programs, often it's very poor beekeeping. No one wants to have this program in their backyard, so it's often in a very poor location, and bees, again, location will respond just because of that. So, number of different reasons that bees might be defensive, but as I indicate, some of it right now is the fact that colonies are big. We're into a drought condition, and we've had a change. If you've harvested any honey, we're hitting a number of these ticks in terms of why right now, this time of year, bees might be defensive. I did talk about this in an article in the magazine Bee Culture. So if you get Bee Culture, handling defensive bees, and it was just this past April of this year that I talked about that. than some of these factors, and a little more depth than here. So now where we are, beekeeping is where we are right now. Unlike areas with Africanized bees, the wild bees, the feral bees, in other words, the non-managed bees that escape as swarms, the bees that have been in bee trees or sides of buildings for years and years or whatever, generally in our area, they are not Africanized bees. But in our area, we will and can and apparently are getting summer introductions. So bees that are more defensive, that may have some of the genetic material of Africanized bees, more likely now in our area to be summer introductions, coming up with pollination colonies, coming up with packages, nukes, any number of ways that they may come. Africanized bees, one of their means of biology is to inhabit an area and then to take over the area after the pioneers come into that area. And they do that largely through the process of swarming. And they are much more frequent in their swarming behavior than our European honeybees. And in some years, like really the last couple of years, it seems like all of our bees want to swarm, or a good number of them. These Africanized bees just do it a little bit differently, do it earlier in the build-up season, and just in a normal year, if they are managed or not, you will still have a great number of swarms. And it is simply for this population, it's biology. They're multiplying possible as fast as possible as a survival instinct. Okay. For them, as well as we have come to understand with bees and bee trees, it may also be a way in which they can deal with mites. Africanized bees do have varroa mites. Okay? The bees themselves are gleaners. They do not wait like most of our populations of European bees to be alerted, to be told by scouts doing the dancing that there is something out there available. So they're gleaners. They are out and they will then leave home to forage at a lower light level. Often will stay at a lower light level at the end of the day. They do follow dances, but it's just not as critical for them to find those resources. And one of the issues when you try to keep a more less defensive bee alongside is simply the genetic material of less defensive bees is that they are waiting to be stimulated, waiting to be informed by scouts that there's something available. In the meantime, the Africanized bee has already been out there and has gathered much of those resources, leaving fewer for trying to keep a less defensive colony alongside it. They, unfortunately, are not very good honey storers. Their behavior, the biology is if conditions are poor in an area for forage, and we're not sure how they're measuring this entirely, they leave. Their biology is to do what we call absconding, to basically leave the area. And where they are natural, the African population is natural in Africa, in East Africa, that means they can go several hundred miles and will then find better forage. Of course, for us, if they leave, particularly this time of year, there's very, very little chance of survival or going far enough to find anything that is better than staying and trying to survive a winter. The population is amazing. They have a multitude of biological means to help maintain their own identity, their own genetic identity. They have, besides this intense amount of swarming, each of them, which like our bees, will tend to find a hollow. And so one colony, then swarming, then swarming again, and then swarming again. That means they're filling up more potential hollows in an area. They rear drones faster in their buildup cycle than do our European bees. Although ours can rear drones pretty quickly, they are even faster. And they will tend to have their drones drift to other colonies, but they are not good colonies for accepting drifting drones. And so one of the issues is they raise drones. Those drones go to any colonies that they can find. If those are the less defensive or less guarding European bees, they enter. And so the European bees are raising fewer of their own drones. They usurp colonies. They leave their own home in a small amount with the queen, land on the side or beneath a colony. Their workers go in and kill the queen colony, and then the queen walks into a new colony. It's just a different type of biology. We do have it, but it is not very common, at least in our bees. Now, to help counter that, if you're going to keep bees, what you have to kind of do with what you have to do, is requeen regularly. If you are keeping bees for the bees, not as a backyard bee, a friendly backyard bee, but you're keeping bees for the resources, then you're going to have to keep more than one to get any amount of resources. And it doesn't really matter if they are defensive or not. Generally, it's not always true, but generally if you've ever visited commercial apiaries, you'll find that they are more quickly to sting. They are apparently more defensive. And as you open colonies, you will have very frequently a halo of bees developing around you. The defensiveness, stinging behavior, is not as significant an issue in terms of what the commercial beekeeper is looking for in his or her colonies. We're just more frequently, often more frequently, very concerned about having defensive bees, concerned for our neighbors, concerned for pets in the neighborhood, our own youngsters, of course. Commercial beekeepers have more isolated locations, and they're just generally not as concerned about the docility in bees at all. Okay, so that's a little bit of look at defensiveness. I don't know if you have a question, you'd like to ask a question at this point, or I haven't seen, other than related to the beginning here, any questions that have come into chat.
So I have a question, Dewey. Are you saying that here in Oregon, that in the summertime, that we do have a potential for having Africanized bees in our area and that they don't survive the wintertime? Or are we just having a few bees here and there and maybe some Africanized genetics, like maybe in drones or queens up here in Portland, Oregon?
Yeah, I'll try to define that a little bit better, but yes, the latter. We will have them if we have a full movement of Africanized bee colony here. We haven't documented that yet in Oregon, but if we did, they would have very little chance of surviving the winter because of these aspects of the biology. But we have a much better chance of Africanized bees genetic material being moved here or brought here in nukes and packages.
Okay, my understanding is that the northern limit of Africanized bees has been moving steadily over the years. And so we have a question in the sidebar that asks what that northern limit of Africanized bees, is it as a result of climate change? And I would like to ask, do we know now what the northernmost aspect where they can survive as a colony is?
I will specifically get to that. If I don't get that answered, ask it again. Okay. I think I've got this here in my next section.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone out on mute have other questions relative to defensive bees? Now, I'm going to drill in a little bit more on Africanized bees. Okay. I thought we might have some on. Okay, that's good. We still have time for questions. All righty, let's see. Where are we now? Oh, yes, yes, I was going on to Africanized bees. So now we found our map and now we know where we're going in our colony. So we're on get on the same page. Africanized bees originated out of East Africa, where they occur in a fairly large area from Ethiopia south to South Africa. They then were brought to Brazil, where at the time there was a lot of beekeepers that kept bees in rustic hives. In other words, less managed hives than a typical managed hive of Langstroth dimensions. But the bees were pretty much in apiaries. Tropical bees swarm less. European bees in tropics swarm less. They don't have that strong buildup and then leaving their colony. And so most of the bees were in apiaries managed by beekeepers. And because it's expensive to import queens, most of the stock was then locally selected, with the larger beekeepers like here selecting their own stock. And as that has changed, then it has changed both our beekeeping, but too, our beekeepers have changed as well. So here in early stages, Panama, the Isthmus of Panama, having the arrival in 1981 of Africanized bees, some of the adaptations quickly were equipment, of course, keeping bees in smaller boxes, larger smokers, heavy, thick gloves, and working together so you're in a colony and you're out of a colony pretty fast. So the beekeepers have changed as well as has the bee. Okay. Now, why they came? Because it was an effort requested by Brazilian beekeepers to improve the bee stock of Brazil. So they sent a world-class geneticist, Warwick Kerr, to look at other stocks of bees. He traveled to both Asia and Africa, as well as North America, and looked at various stocks. And then in Africa, collected a bunch of different stocks with the intention of sending them back to Brazil and doing a breeding program. It was not just to look for another bee, but then also to adapt that bee to the Brazilian conditions. Those bees were killed when they were transported through Portugal. And so what he actually brought were some queens from 2 queen breeders in South Africa, and a couple queens he'd had from his last country he'd visited, which was north of South Africa, Tanganyika. So the wide selection that he had intended to bring into Brazil for the breeding program quickly became a very limited selection of what is this total population of Africanized bees. Now, if that sounds weird to us, why would anyone do that? I would remind everyone that we did the very same thing. When we were having issues with the bees that were initially brought by the colonialists to North America, we actually had a U.S. Department of Agriculture employee begin looking for different stocks of bees in Europe. And our father, what we call the father of modern beekeeping, the Reverend Langstroth, with the Langstroth who developed the Langstroth hive and wrote the book, The Hive and Honeybee, was one of the leading persons to import stock of Italian bees from northern Italy, and some others did as well. So what was our response is exactly in the 1860s was really the exact same response for Brazilian beekeepers. Well, instead of using what we have, let's go look for another bee and bring it in, and then make our selections and find and get that way a bee better for Brazil. We've tried others, of course. What has really stuck has been Carniolan bees, Caucasian bees, and of course the Italians, mostly from northern Italy, but we brought in about a dozen different groupings of bees. The others just have not worked well. And we believe the Italian stock has replaced the original bees, what we call Northern European bees or German bees, mostly replaced that stock. And because we didn't keep our populations separate, we really have a mixture of bees from Italy bred here, mixed with some Carniole and some Caucasian bee. We really have a hybrid bee, or some have even gone so far as to label we have an American bee or a North American bee here in the US and Canada and Mexico. Now, quite remarkably for this bee was its ability to maintain its own genetic identity and to remain defensive. It was known as a defensive bee in Africa of all of the various groupings of bees, populations of bees, what we at one time called races of bees or subspecies of bees. This is on that scale among the most defensive of all of those that could have been imported from Africa into the Americas. And it has this ability to keep its own, maintain its own genetic identity. It was introduced in 1957 into the suburbs of Sao Paulo. That's where they were attempting the breeding program. There was an accident. Bees escaped and swarmed, as this bee will do. And then at that point, a decision was made that they would distribute virgin queens because it was such a great bee, seen as a great bee initially of things that it was doing differently than the European bees. And so there was a breeding program without selection, the original intention, without any selection to distribute these. Then based solely on defensive bees compared to bees being in beekeeper apiaries, not swarming very frequently and not being defensive at all, based solely on that as a differentiation, bee populations were recognized that they were spreading. They reached neighboring Paraguay in about 10 years, and Bolivia just a little bit longer than that. Uruguay just a couple more years after that, and have continued that spread. It's been said that they would never make it across the Amazon. They did in record pace. We had established a program, our U.S. Department of Agriculture established a program in Venezuela where we had greatly increased the beekeeping population of Venezuela. They were given bees, they were given equipment, they were given hives, for example, from some of our USAID funds. So all of a sudden, there were a huge number of new beekeepers in Venezuela. That was thought to be then an area that would help prevent that they would then spread on into the isthmus. And unfortunately, it then created the distinction of the highest number of deaths from stinging of defensive bees happened in the country of Venezuela. And much of this was the families of, or people, neighbors of, or the beekeepers themselves, that these new beekeepers in the program that we had established. They moved into the isthmus in 1982, where I first met them. I captured the second swarm, or went with others to capture second swarm on the outskirts of Panama City. We had a very serious discussion on that point, since at that point, the United States owned 5 miles of either side of the canal zone, that we would then make a barrier where all of the vegetation would be killed with pesticides, so that there would be a physical barrier at the zone area that the bees then would not be able to cross. Thank goodness that was never implemented, because that would not have been effective. We spent a great deal of money in the narrowing of Mexico here in the late 80s to again try another concept dilution, where we again had beekeepers capture swarms and they were paid for the swarms. And again, to keep a large number of European colonies that had European bees, and they were giving queens to requeen. It was a several multi-million-dollar program, between Mexico and the U.S. as a barrier. That too failed, and so they appeared in the Brownsville, South Texas, far South Texas area in 1990. Since then, they have spread and are well-established populations in all of the states on the Gulf and the Mexican border. They have been reported in many other different states, and so some of these X's are where some of those reports occur. And of course, then invading the islands of the Caribbean. Where they have not yet been detected in the Americas is Canada. Although we have some genetic markers that have been detected. They have not been reported for Chile yet, or in the south of Argentina, because of requeening. They are keeping European bees there. In Peru and Ecuador on the Pacific side of South America, beekeepers actually took the bees over the mountains. So again, most of the spread is bee related, not human related at all. Although obviously to the islands, that's shipping, and these access in the U.S., that's some mode of transport by if not beekeepers, by others. Entirely accidental, of course. Other names for this bee. Initially, it was Africanized bee because of the thought that it was hybridizing with the European bees in Brazil. We found that there are hybrids, yes, but the bee has a way of maintaining its own genetic identity. And so there was actually very little hybridization. So others had suggested the Brazilian bee, the assassin bee, a neotropical bee. The beekeepers in Brazil call it the externata, the foreign bee. And of course, Time magazine and reporting stories of people being killed. A bus accident that killed some students because the bees flew into the bus, and several other things, reporting on the news from Brazil. They labeled it as the killer bee. Now, the USDA for a while was keeping a map of its distribution. And so it initially came into South Texas, and each of these different colors represents a different year in which it was found in the United States. And this is by county. So if it was found in a county in the United States. So you can see up until this map, they basically stopped keeping this in 2012. You can see its distribution has maintained roughly west of the Mississippi. Initially, we believe all of the Florida introductions are by shipping, by man-made means of moving, rather than to be moving across the Gulf states and into Florida, but rather separate introductions. You can see they came into Arizona and Southern California at different year than they did into Texas. And we don't believe this was a move from Texas westward, but rather a separate up the Pacific side of Mexico. This was up Atlantic side of Mexico in terms of movement. Now, we do have records of beyond the original states, the first layer of states, records for Clark County in Nevada, for example, in southern Utah, for example, and Oklahoma and Arkansas, for example. You'll find that there are hardly any records or no reliable record for Alabama. And Georgia has had a very rigorous program to eliminate them. So it is not in Georgia. They will maintain that it is not, although it is also in Tennessee. So it depends a little bit when they might have been introduced and who was looking. Unfortunately, that map's not being kept up any longer by U.S. Department of Agriculture. All right, so of concern to the world and to us is California. because that is where most of the queen rearing is done. There's a significant amount in the southeastern United States, the Georgia, for example, and Florida. But I want to come back to your question, Cheryl, in terms of how far are they and will they be here? Lynn from UC San Diego, along with a UC Davis professor in 2008, published this paper, Africanized bees extend their distribution in California. It's +1, so that is open access. Just use your search engine to either look for Lynn 2018 or Africanized bees in California. California, like many of the other states, had a monitoring program, and so they stopped the monitoring program after it had been in Riverside, in the desert, in the 2 southern counties in California. So this was after about a 10-year period, looking at specific genetic markers that occur in the Africanized population that are not in the European colony population. So this is not looking at defensiveness in bees, not looking at how defensive a colony might be, but actually looking at the genetic material. And so they found with the red that those are counties that they were finding more than one of their sample of Africanized bees. And this includes a sample in total of about 3,000 bees that they collected. They did not go into apiaries to collect the bees. They collected the bees from flowers, so foraging and flowers. The pink represents counties where they believe they are, but they did not have enough records for them. So Nevada County and Yolo County, let's see, Napa is here, so that might be Sonoma County, Glenn County, for example. They believe that they are there. Now, if you know any of agriculture of California, so this is the area where all of our beekeepers go for almond pollination. This is the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, and all of our queen rearing is here. A lot of the queen rearing extends, of course, down here in this area of the bay. Not along the bay, but after the coastal mountains. A lot of it here, but on up here where the bigger queen rearers are, the Hycums and the bigger producers of bees, package bees and queens, are all located. But of course, they too, like our Oregon beekeepers, take their bees down for almond pollination to get that income and to build up their bees on almond pollen before they then start rearing all the colonies that they're going to put in the packages. They don't start shaking packages until the bees come back from almonds, because those are where their bees will be. So that is concerning. You might ask the question, why is California not doing more sampling? But that's the case in virtually all of the U.S. states. The only one that is very active with the searching program and elimination is the state of Georgia. None of the others are. All right, now our concept of bees as they developed in Brazil and spread southward, in other words, through Paraguay, through Uruguay, and into Argentina. Argentina is the second or third largest honey producing country in the world. Our concept in Argentina is that as we take a transect and go from the border with Bolivia southward in Argentina, past Buenos Aires into the bulk of the Pampas region, which is a part of where their honey production comes from. Some of it comes from south of there. Is that there is a zone that has set up a hybrid zone. So that if you look at the defensiveness of colonies, you look at the markers and defensiveness both. As you go from the north, the border here with Paraguay, and you go further south into Argentina, you get a hybrid zone, so that as you are north, most of what you look at will be blue here, Italian bees or Italian genetic material. and some hybridization. And I'm sorry, as you go from north to south, because it's different from the equator. So then as you go, let me get this back. I've got it backwards. So as you collect bees from this portion, the northern part of Argentina, you have the chance of picking up Africanized genetic material. As you go further south, you get more of the hybrid material, this green mark hidden in between. And then as you go further south into Argentina, you get more of the blue material, in other words, European material. Now, this is a separate publication. So to take a look at this, if you'd like, you can use your search engine for CalFee or selection and hybridization of African honeybees. So that's what we call a hybrid zone. And so the queens in Argentina are reared to the south of that, and there is a very active requeening program here. This is the country of Uruguay, and in the cattle area of northern Uruguay is pretty much all Africanized bees, but where all the people live in southern Uruguay is a mixture. And some of the bees are defensive and some of the bees are less defensive. So let's look at roughly the same latitude here in North America. And so in this same paper, by the way, this whole study was done on 300 bees, okay? Total 300 bees that they collected. So as you look in San Diego County, in the outskirts of San Diego, you come up along the coast, up into the Bay Area and into Napa County. Further south, you find a higher percentage of red, of Africanized. We don't really see much of a hybrid zone, but there is some. And then as you go further north, you get to more European stock. So is that, it's not exactly the same, but it has been suggested that this hybrid zone would set up so that in Northern California and in mountains of California, you would have mostly European bees. Coastal California, you would have a greater percentage of Africanized bees, and you would have hybrids of that in between. It has not been yet established, but there are based on 300 bees, it is suggested that, as in Argentina, that perhaps there is a hybrid zone that is developing or will develop as the bees then extend northward, or the population attempts their spread northward. Now, the other big, we can look at other biological differences. In San Diego County, most of the feral colonies can be very defensive, a greater percentage, a very high percentage. So too in northern Argentina, so too in northern Uruguay. As you go north in the Bay Area, there have been some very well publicized stinging instances and very typical Africanized bee behavior, but most of the feral colonies that you would collect that occur would be European. Yes, so too as you go further south in Argentina. And likewise defensive. If you do a defensive test, or you're simply looking at docility, more in the lower area would likely to be more defensive, less defensive as you go north. Likewise, the same in Uruguay and in Argentina as well. North of that, Bolivia, this is Bolivia, Paraguay and Bolivia coming in right here. North of that, both of them are very, very Africanized. Most of the population is Africanized and not the hybrid. So that, I think, will hopefully try to answer the question, and then followed by the you had, Cheryl, but then also this one. So using the supercomputer at NASA, we looked at in terms of, I was included, we looked at in terms of the bees that were already in the US, of the conditions, weather conditions, rainfall and temperature conditions, minimum winter temperature, et cetera, of where would the bees then potentially spread. So the blue, Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. The dark blue indicates that establishment of feral populations would less be likely than in South Texas, South Arizona, South California. Now, the shading in between indicates that there we could have that hybrid, that mixture, some bees being Africanized, some being hybrids between, and some being European bees. You can see that where they are presently have spread are all areas that have that lighter color, except what is surprising here is in Tennessee, because there is a population there. And you can see Georgia is likely to have the possibility if they ever discontinue their very strong trapping program. But of concern to us, as you can see, is you do get some lighter color as you come up into parts of Oregon and Washington. And again, this is by county. So this is before, so we did this study when we were on those superconductors, we did this study in the mid 2000s. And with climate change, if this study was done again, it should be done again. No one knows, no way of predicting, because climate change is going to affect different regions of the country differently. But it should be done again with some of those parameters taken into account. Okay, so its name, killer bees, as I indicated, that came from Time magazine, and it came because of their propensity for defense. People have been killed as a result of too many stings in too short a period of time. It's a toxic reaction of too many stings. And of course, people that are allergic, people that, and as we saw in Venezuela, that were just not cognizant of that bee sting, and you got to take precautions of getting too many stings. This bee follows you into vegetation. It follows you into buildings once it's been alerted, once there are stings in you or your equipment, your clothing. And so it is different. Now, one of the ways that we can tell if a beekeeper has highly defensive colonies is the stinging of animals that are corralled, animals that are tied, animals with babies, those that tend to protect young, can't flee, can't get out of a corral, are tied up, can't get away from the tie, they're being tied. So our early warning device for the spread of these things initially was animals being stung. All righty. But how did that get in there? I've been talking about bees, not murder hornets, for those that got confused at this point. Not murder hornets. So beekeeping, Africanized bee have changed beekeeping and beekeepers. We do a number of different types of things. We need to protect against defensiveness with our equipment. We build up populations only for a specific purpose. We do not keep large populations, as has been our tendency with European bees. We keep the colonies separated. We keep them small. We'll often do inspection later in the day, so the colonies have a chance to settle down at night. We avoid animal disturbances, road disturbances, doing all those things just that can mean bees that are more defensive, including Africanized honeybees. All righty.
Yes, we have questions.
Oh, okay.
So I'll start with, I think that Kevin's question was answered. You talked a lot about the spread of the bees and the climate change. And then Ryan asked, why does Chile not have Africanized bees? Climate, terrain, is that why Chile does so much queen production of the European honeybees?
They do, because they have a market. They sell a lot of queens in Europe. They'd like to sell more in North America, but are not permitted to do so currently. And the Andes Mountains has been a barrier. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile, and the Andes Mountains between Bolivia, where the population is, and Chile. So geographic.
Okay. And then Gil asks, if requeening helps forestall Africanized bees, how do you find a queen which is not mated with Africanized stock?
They have tried any number of things, importing queens. And if the feral population is largely Africanized, that doesn't work. The European colonies go downhill. So you don't. What you do is you breed bees that are less defensive than bees that you can manage.
Okay.
By the way, finding a queen in these colonies is impossible. The queens are very sensitive to light. As soon as you open a colony, you get parading around the box on the inside. They abandon brood, they abandon frames. And it is essentially impossible to find a queen in any of these colonies.
Okay, and Kevin asks, how would a beekeeper distinguish defensive behavior that is the result of genetics versus the other possibilities? Experience, process of elimination?
There is no way, and unfortunately, if you are thinking it is it is genetic, there is no active program of testing for these gene markers. There's no public laboratory that you can go to get that test done, unfortunately.
But there are gene markers. I mean, there are people, the researchers that you quoted earlier in your talk that they could, that it's possible. There's just no
Yes.
way publicly to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's no private lab set up to do it. As far as I know, they would have to, figure out what gene markers and get the right materials to do that test. So there's no public lab that I know of either that's doing that testing.
Okay. Those are the only questions we have so far.
Or private, I mean, a private lab. And there's no USDA lab or public. Okay. Let me, some of you often wondered about me with Bolivia. Let me just finish up with that. I first encountered them in 82, and now with the family, keep them in Bolivia, where I have family and I go to for part of the year. Most of you do not know where Bolivia is, so that is this green blotch here. Most of Bolivia here is drained to the north to become rivers of the Amazon. And I live in that part, which is the high mountain valley between the tropical area, which is actually 2/3 of Bolivia, and the Andes portion, which is the portion of the mountains that run from Bolivia down into Chile. I live at 8,200 feet elevation. And in Cochabamba at 8,200 elevation, so that would be equivalent to a more temperate climate. We use neither air conditioning or heating in the homes in Cochabamba. You don't need them. We keep bees in the city. So here in a city of about 1 million people, just over around that church steeple is the central square of the city of Cochabamba, which has the big cathedral and all the main offices of all the municipalities, etc. So this is on a terrace of a building that's just within a block of Central. We keep them where they're animals. Around this area, there was a fairly large, you could smell it right away, a pig factory. And yet the beekeeper had colonies here. I entered this colony through here and was lax and didn't have my veil on. And I picked up 3 stings just walking on this side from here, from these colonies here. But we can keep them around where there are animals. Here I am looking at one of the queen rearing facilities. There's 3 big ones and there's 3 larger ones in the city. And they rear the queens in the city and then requeen the colonies in the countryside with a selected stock. So these are our rearing nukes. So these are our grafting colonies. So these have a population of maybe 3 frames, 4 frames. And this is right within, it's not downtown, but right in the major part of the city. Gary Owens from British Columbia came to visit, and this is about 2 blocks from where I live. This is not my house, but here's one of our other queen breeders. And again, he is rearing his queens here. We almost always requeen with queen cells rather than mated queens. And so he's raising these queens to queen cell stage, and then they're being sold at that stage and then transported out to the countryside to mate with the drones that are in the countryside. So that is what we're going to call our hybrid. And hopefully that they're going to be somewhat docile bees as a result of that exchange. So what are our problems? Here's one: queens, queen stock, maintaining colonies that you can work with. Docility or defensiveness is a scale. The scale is much different there than it is here, much different in Southern California for our commercial beekeepers than here, South Texas, etc. And always having that stock. When I showed you that color map of where they might go, by the way, fully 90% of the queen rearing in the United States is in the area of all those lighter colors. I don't know if you happen to notice that. The area so far outside of it is Georgia, if they do not have any. So finding a queen, requeening, getting stock that you can work with. Second problem is that swarming propensity of the bees. And then they're finding a suitable home site, so that in a city, they will then go into the eaves of a building where they can get into. And so there, as in Southern California and Arizona and South Texas, one of the big incomes for beekeepers is removing swarms or setting up a program to keep swarms away from the resort area. Disney has a huge number of maintained traps to trap these into traps, favorable trapping, rather than letting them get into any of the Disney buildings. And then beekeepers are being paid to run that trapping program. So a huge amount of trapping before they get to this stage. So problem number 2 is that propensity to swarm. Problem number 3 is trying to evaluate colonies. As I went with my European experience there, this isn't anything worthwhile. We'd throw this colony away, requeen it, unite it with something else. You can see there's almost no brood in it, almost no bees, virtually no honey in it. And there were 4 colonies under this Ramada. And so by standards with Africanized bees, this is great potential because this thing will explode in a month. So you always manage bees to be at this stage where they are relatively docile, relatively not great boiling out at you and setting up all these soldiers. And then as the resources come on, this colony explodes and it starts giving you stored honey. But as I say, this is junk. This isn't very valid as a colony, but there it is. Okay, so we're always doing that. Now, non-problem, there are several non-problems. Defensiveness, you just get used to it. Grin and bear it. You keep your bees differently, but the big non-problem is the varroa mite. They have them. I have been sampling in several places in Bolivia. We find that the mites can get up to about 12% of populations of honeybees when we're doing alcohol washes. 12%. Our standard here is under 3%. But no mite control necessary. We do not have to control mites. In part, we do not have the viruses, but in part, this bee then has these behaviors in which it kind of keeps ahead of the mites. And those colonies that at 12% all absconded shortly after we did the sampling. Now, we may have caused the absconding ourselves, but that's their way of dealing with it. And in that area, again, they don't have to go very far, and they often can find more resources. Not so much in the big valley where I am, but in the tropical. So circling back, do we need to be concerned? We have a couple of issues to think about. The feral populations in large numbers are not likely to set up in our area based on where they have been, with the caveat of what will subglobal warming mean as a difference. But the transport of colonies that have become somewhat Africanized is of concern. We do have that showing up of highly defensive colonies with the traits that we defensiveness traits that we kind of equate with the Africanized bees. That's swarming out at you, this large number of bees, this huge grouping of bees, always trying to get bouncing off the veil, trying to sting any place where the stings will stick. The following you, meeting you before you get your veil on, before you enter the apiary, and the fact that some other behavioral things, they abandon brood, so you lift up a frame and the bees just run off the comb, all the bees, this parading around the inside of the colony. So it's a measure of looking at some of these qualities. So we are seeing some of those in some colonies each year in Oregon, and since I have been here for 12 years, that percentage that I seem to hear about has been on the increase. Now, none of those bees are being tested for the marker. We have a couple of people that are selling queens and nukes in Oregon, specifically queens that they're reared in nukes in Oregon, that are doing the rearing when they're in almond pollination in the south. And of course, we have others that then sell nukes that have been in the south, the worker bees have, but with queens that have not. The queens have come from Northern California or have come from Hawaii. When we have a mixture of a population, we find that this defensive behavior can become noticeable. So that what we had as a colony then becomes more defensive as we add on these other qualities, bigger colonies, queenlessness, change in weather, change in conditions, following our harvest from them, all of those conditions that I mentioned later, we find that we have more of this degree of defensiveness. And then for other reasons, some colonies just seem to become defensive that do not have that origin. It could have been a captured swarm, come from a queen that is reared in a more northern area, etc. So there are some that become defensiveness that we do not seem to have a reason why they might be, and others where there could be a connection to where we know there are Africanized bees in the US in one fashion or another. The other characteristic is if we have a queen that mates, and we know they mate with a dozen or more drones, and if that queen mates with more than one drone or several drones that are Africanized drones, and then that colony will have a greater tendency to be defensive. So it doesn't take 100% mating of Africanized drones. It probably takes only around 20% of those drones that a queen might mate with, that then her offspring would be exhibiting that defensive behavior, even though the rest of the colony of European stock, European male, European queen, would still be in the colony. So it doesn't take a full-blown change over of the population. It can take as small as a small number of drones mating with a queen that we use or someone uses to raise bees, or whatever might be the case. We have seen an increase in small hive beetle. That small hive beetle comes from somewhere, all right? It's not homegrown. We have seen an increase of defensive-ness in bees in Oregon. That has to come from somewhere. It is not homegrown. So I think the parallel is, yeah, we certainly do see a small hive beetle and their numbers are increasing. We do see bees that are more defensive than we think they should be, that are exhibiting this milieu of traits, this variety of traits that we equate to more Africanized bees than we think we should be seeing. There's no simple answer. I hope I've been able to try to level some of the playing field and trying to come up with some of them. Now, let me circle back finally. Handling. Don't handle defensive colonies unless absolutely needed. Avoid movement, vibration, individual hive stands. Make sure your PPE is on before you enter. Use it. Don't take the veil off too soon. Be prepared for excess reaction. I sometimes down there will work bees without gloves, but they're close by in a pocket, let me tell you. Manipulate only when necessary for inappropriate weather conditions. And if it seems to be an issue, the last time you were in them, you got stung more than you thought you should, or more bees flying about, intimidating you at the bouncing on the veil, wait until later in the day rather than trying to do it early in the day. Be fast and gentle with any colony, but avoid excessive time, because that is just exposing more soldier bees. Manipulate weaker, smaller colonies, if inexperienced, versus the full-size colonies. And I always recommend nuke colonies. Keep nuke colonies as a resource colony. And in the summer, you got to go into a bee colony, go into your nuke colony. You'll find everything you need to know in nuke colonies of what's going on, as you will in those full-size colonies. So keep small colonies, split requeen units with selected queen cells, so that you are rearing from what is here, rather than having a chance that it's coming from somewhere else. They've got to come from somewhere else. Right now they're going to come from somewhere else. They're not here. So that's how we're going to keep them away from us. We have to harvest frequently. That does help, but rather than our method of doing it now, that helps as well. And finally, and this is really tough, if we have that defensive colony and it continues, in other words, not just one experience that you have with them, more stings, more bees in your face, etc., but you go in 2 or 3 times in a row and it continues, then consider euthanizing that colony. It's hard to do. It's hard to get rid of a queen. And boy, it's even harder to euthanize a whole colony. It really is. Questions? I don't know if this helped any.
Well, I think it helped quite a bit. So we didn't have any other questions. The only one you had already answered from Ted. He's just wanted to know about the varroa mites and the Africanized bees.
They use a lot more propolis, so there could be any number of qualities why they're better against mites than our bees. The other great one is they do develop more rapidly. Queens in 15 days, workers in 19, 20 days.
I mean, I have heard that there have been some defensive bees coming out of Eastern Oregon, and I don't know if it's a true thing. I've just heard anecdotally that people have gotten swarms from Eastern Oregon that have been particularly and oddly defensive, especially in that swarm situation where we're so used to seeing an early swarm not being so defensive, but then maybe later in the year swarms are just more defensive. So have you heard anything about anything coming out of Eastern Oregon?
Yeah, it's been persisting now for a good 3 years. And not just an occasional one, but a number of beekeepers and a number of apiaries having that same situation. Yes.
So Gil asked, if Africanized honeybees follow you into a building, how do you escape? Go out the back door.
They keep going through the building. No. Eventually they do end up going to the light. So when we're done, we get into our vehicle and we drive down the road and open the window, let some out, drive down a little further, open the window, let some out. Eventually we can start taking our clothing off. And same too in a building. So you go into a building, if you can shut the door, then they're going to end up going to a window. They eventually, unlike what you might have heard, they do eventually give up. They sting you or they eventually give up.
And Eric asks, does the sting of this bee hurt more than the sting of our European honeybee?
No, the venom pattern has been looked at. There are some differences, but it's believed that the hurt or the chance for an allergic reaction or the secondary reactions of what might occur is no different. What is killing animals, particularly and people as well, is the toxic reaction. Too many stings, too short a period of time, and exposure of people with already poor health conditions, and then they're getting a sting, and then not being as tolerant of the numbers of stings that we, let's say as a beekeeper, have been getting stings all through the year as we might be.
To what extent have people in Southern California been affected by the average population? How much have they been impacted by the Africanized honeybee?
The schools and public authorities and parks, et cetera, are paying to have bees removed from the trees and from their buildings, for example. They set up, the beekeepers or individuals set up traps, and they trap them before they get in, on usually perimeter traps before they get into trying to get them before they get into the property. And a baited trap is more attractive than a tree hollow, for example, or a hollow of a building. So they're trapping them. The commercial beekeepers are requeening twice a year. They're having to double up on their annual requeening to try to keep stock, and they are seeking to euthanize some of the colonies. There's none right along the coast, but inland, Imperial Valley has a couple of very large commercial beekeepers that are there for part of the year at least, for all the pollination. The Imperial Valley is a huge cantaloupe growing area, for example. Needs bees.
Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to hit your space bar and ask if you want to ask, or you can type it into the chat box.
Dewey, could I ask you a off-topic question that we were talking about before the start of the meeting?
We want to go to that, Cheryl? Yeah, sure, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't look, it doesn't look like anybody else has any other questions pertinent to the Africanized or the defensive bee, so sure.
Okay, thanks. Dewey, we were talking, I recently did a newspaper combine, and I haven't checked yet to see if it was successful, but assuming that it is, the brood nest now is a mess, because of the two different colonies. Would you, given the time of year, would you suggest that, in a week or two, that I would manipulate the frames to try to put the brood nest back into some sort of compact, formation, or is there enough time left in the season, for the bees to sort things out?
What they need is a nectar flow of our bees this time of year to push the queen down into the lower box, and we're not getting it. And so feeding would help do that. Feeding above the colony or an in-hive feeder in the top box will help push that down. The second would be to, if you find the queen, you find the frame she's on, make sure she is in the lower box, and for a period of time, put a queen excluder on so that as brood hatches up above in the second box, that would be then available to put ripening nectar in. Okay. But don't forget to take that queen excluder out. Yeah. Now, manipulating and moving frames around, yes, if you find, for example, if you've got full frames down below that are mostly just honey, you can move them up. And some frames that got an awful lot of brood up above, move them down. Yes, you can, but in a late season combine, it's a mishmash usually.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the off-topic question.
Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Thanks again, Dewey, for a great presentation. You've answered all my questions, and we just really appreciate having you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate it. And to all that this evening, I hope you have good bees this fall. Our bees are light on stores, and the forecast is for a mild fall. So feed. I think we got to get those feeders out. Find the cheapest sugar you can and buy lots of it while it's cheap.
Okay, thank you all. Good night.
Good night, all.